The airplane cabin buzzed with the low hum of engines and soft chatter of passengers settling into their seats. A young girl sat near the window, clutching her small pink backpack tightly against her chest. Her eyes were wide with wonder as she gazed out at the endless sky, her excitement so pure it filled the quiet space around her. She was traveling alone for the first time, and though nervous, she carried herself with quiet courage. The flight attendant in red uniform moved briskly down the aisle, her expression sharp and her tone clipped. She had the look of someone who believed authority was power, and she carried herself like every passenger was beneath her. When she reached the row where the young girl sat, she paused, her eyes narrowing. The girl smiled politely, but the attendant's response was a frown. "Whose child are you? Why are you sitting here alone?" The attendant asked, her voice loud enough to turn heads. The girl quietly explained that her ticket was with her, that her parents had arranged everything. She spoke with innocence, her words soft, but the attendant cut her off sharply. "Don't talk back. You shouldn't be here. This is not your place," the woman snapped. The passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at the girl with pity, others pretending not to notice. The young girl lowered her head, her small hands clutching the straps of her bag as if it were a shield. Minutes passed, but the attendant did not let it go. She returned again, her voice sharper, her face red with anger. "I said get out of this seat. You don't belong here," she shouted, startling the girl. The words echoed through the cabin. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the sound of the engines. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to cry. Her chest tightened, yet she held her ground, staring at the seat in front of her. The humiliation burned deep inside. Not just because of the shouting, but because of the stares. People were watching. Some whispered. No one stood up for her. A man across the aisle frowned, but said nothing. A woman 2 rows back sighed heavily and looked away. The passengers chose silence, as if the shame of one small girl was not their concern. The girl felt the weight of their indifference, and for the first time in her life, she understood how cruel the world could be. Finally, the attendant leaned close, her finger pointing toward the aisle. "Get up. Out now." The girl rose slowly, her small frame trembling, and stepped into the aisle. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, judging, mocking, pitying. The flight attendant's hand gripped her arm, guiding her toward the front of the plane with an iron hold. The humiliation was complete. She had been cast out, made to feel unworthy, treated as less than human. But deep inside, a fire began to kindle. The girl's tears dried quickly, replaced by something sharper, something stronger. She whispered to herself words that no one else could hear. She would not forget this moment. She would not forget the face of the woman who shamed her. Flight attendant thought she had won. She thought her authority was unchallenged, that the small girl was powerless. But the truth was different. The girl had more strength than anyone could see, more courage than the attendant could ever imagine. The plane continued its journey into the clouds, but a storm had already been born inside the heart of the young girl. What began as humiliation would soon turn into something far greater. She would not only rise from this moment, she would rise above it. The passengers shifted back into their routines, some adjusting their headphones, others opening books, trying to erase the scene they had just witnessed. Yet a few could not. Stop glancing toward the front of the cabin, uneasy with the memory of the girl's face as she was forced to leave her seat. They sensed something unusual about her, something that lingered even after she was gone. In that moment, the young girl made a silent vow. She would prove them wrong, every one of them. The flight attendant who shouted at her, the passengers who stayed quiet, the world that believed she was too small to matter. She would make them see. She would make them remember. What no one knew was that her revenge was already forming. It would not be loud or violent, but it would be powerful. And when it came, it would leave the entire plane stunned. And the flight attendant humbled in a way she never imagined. The sky outside stretched on forever, endless and free. The girl stared at it one last time before closing her eyes. The war had begun, and she would not lose. Asterisk. The young girl sat quietly near the front of the plane, placed on a jump seat by the angry attendant. Her small legs dangled above the floor, swinging slowly, but her eyes stared straight ahead, burning with emotions too heavy for her age. She could still hear the whispers behind her, the rustling of passengers shifting uncomfortably. Some looked at her with pity, some with judgment, but none had spoken when she needed them. The flight attendant returned to the aisle with a triumphant smirk, walking tall as if she had restored order. Her uniform was perfect, her hair flawless, but her eyes betrayed a deep arrogance. She saw the young girl as nothing more than a problem, an inconvenience in her perfect world. The girl's chest rose and fell with steady breaths. She was fighting back tears, but behind her silence, her mind was racing. She was too young to fully understand authority, but she knew what was right and wrong. And this was wrong. She had been shamed, not for anything she did, but simply because she was small, alone, and easy to target. Passengers tried to distract themselves. A man pulled out his tablet, pretending to read. A mother adjusted her child's seatbelt. A group of college students whispered among themselves, stealing glances toward the front. The atmosphere of the cabin had shifted, though. The outburst had left an invisible scar in the air, and even those who looked away could feel its weight. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional, reminding everyone of safety protocols. His words barely registered. The young girl sat still, her hands gripping her backpack tightly. She thought about her parents waiting for her at the other end of this flight. How proud they had been when she boarded alone. She could almost hear her mother's encouraging words, "You are strong. You can do this," echoing in her ears. The attendant walked past again, casting a sharp glance at the girl. Her tone was low this time, but still harsh. "Stay there. Don't move until we land. Do you understand?" The girl nodded silently, though her eyes did not waver. The attendant didn't notice the flicker of defiance, the small spark that had begun to grow. She turned away, too confident in her belief that she had control. Minutes stretched into an hour. The hum of the engines and the steady rhythm of the flight filled the space. The young girl remained quiet, but she began to observe. She watched how the passengers avoided the attendant's gaze, how they bowed their heads when she walked by. She noticed how one elderly woman seemed unsettled, her lips pressed tightly as if she wanted to speak but couldn't gather the courage. The girl understood something in that moment. Fear was everywhere on this plane, not just in her. The attendant's authority had silenced them all, not just her. And that silence gave the woman power. The girl shifted slightly in her seat, her mind turning. She was not powerless. She still had her voice, her presence, her courage. And though she was young, she sensed that courage could carry more weight than the sharpness of authority. When the attendant returned once more to serve drinks, the girl caught the eye of a man across the aisle. His expression softened, and for a brief moment, she saw guilt there. He looked away quickly, ashamed that he had not spoken up earlier. The girl realized something. She was not the only one who knew this was wrong. She was just the only one who had suffered directly. She lifted her chin slightly, sitting straighter. Her silence was no longer the silence of defeat, but of planning. She was waiting, listening, thinking. Revenge did not have to be loud. Revenge could be quiet, clever, and strong. The plane rocked gently as it cut through the clouds, and the girl pressed her forehead to the cool window. She thought of her parents again, of the pride they had in her strength. She whispered softly under her breath, words only she could hear. "I will show them. I will show her." The attendant continued her rounds, oblivious to the storm brewing. in the young girl's heart. She believed the matter was settled, that the small child was too weak to fight back. But the truth was, the girl was already preparing for the moment that would come. Passengers exchanged subtle glances as if they, too, felt the tension building again. Something was unfinished, unresolved. They could sense it in the air, in the way the young girl carried herself even after being humiliated. There was strength there, quiet but undeniable. And though no one could predict how it would happen, there was a growing certainty that the flight attendant's actions would not remain unanswered. The girl's silence was not surrender, it was the beginning of something that would change the entire flight. The engines roared softly, the sky outside stretched endlessly, and the girl sat waiting, her small hands holding tightly to her backpack, her eyes glowing with determination. The revenge that would stun the entire plane was already written in her heart. The hours passed slowly in the air, and the cabin began to feel heavy with an unspoken tension. The young girl still sat on the hard jump seat near the front, her backpack clutched to her chest. Though her body was small and fragile, her eyes carried a quiet strength. She wasn't broken. Instead, she was waiting, watching every detail unfold around her. The flight attendant moved through the rows with stiff grace, serving drinks and snacks with a smile that looked more like a mask. Her earlier rage was hidden behind practiced professionalism, but the passengers had not forgotten what they had seen. The echoes of her shouting still lingered, and every time she walked past, passengers seemed to shrink a little further into their seats. The young girl noticed. She noticed everything, the way a man avoided looking at her, the way two women whispered softly to each other, the way a little boy pointed at her until his mother pulled his hand down quickly. She wasn't invisible. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. For a while she felt her cheeks burn with shame again, but then another feeling grew stronger inside her. If they had seen it, then they could not deny it. The humiliation was not only hers to carry. The weight of silence belonged to everyone. The engines hummed, the lights dimmed slightly as the plane entered calmer skies. The girl opened her backpack quietly and pulled out a small notebook. Her parents had given it to her before the trip, telling her to write down her thoughts if she ever felt nervous. She placed it on her lap, opened to a clean page, and began to write slowly. Her handwriting was small but steady. She wrote about what had happened, each detail sharp and clear. The words the attendant had shouted, the looks from the passengers, the way she had been pulled from her seat. She poured every feeling onto the page, the shame, the anger, the vow she had whispered to herself. Her young mind understood that stories had power, and this was her story. A woman seated nearby noticed her writing. The woman leaned forward slightly, curiosity in her eyes. She smiled faintly, as though offering silent encouragement. The girl met her gaze briefly, then returned to her notebook, her pencil scratching softly against the paper. The flight attendant walked past again, her heels clicking on the floor, her eyes narrowing when she saw the girl writing. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. The girl looked up, her voice calm but firm. "I'm writing everything." The attendant's face froze for a moment, then twisted into a mocking smile. "No one will care what you write," she hissed, lowering her voice so others wouldn't hear. But the girl didn't flinch. She held her pencil tighter, her chin lifted. The attendant moved on quickly, but unease flickered in her eyes. She didn't realize that her harshness had already begun to plant doubt in the passengers' minds. The girl's courage was like a spark, small but visible, and people were beginning to notice. The hours dragged on. The girl continued to write, filling the pages with her truth. She didn't cry anymore. Instead, she described how she felt, how wrong it had been, and how she would never forget. Each word she wrote was like building a wall of strength inside herself. When the plane began to prepare for landing, the attendants moved about, checking seatbelts and securing trays. The young girl closed her notebook, hugging it against her chest. Her eyes were calm now, her breathing steady. She had no fear left. The descent was smooth, the wheels touching down with a soft thud. The passengers applauded half-heartedly, but the energy inside the cabin was still strained. Everyone seemed eager to leave, to escape the weight of what they had witnessed. As the seatbelt light clicked off, the attendant stepped forward, her voice loud and commanding as she instructed passengers to wait in their rows. She glanced at the girl, her expression still firm, but for the first time she seemed uncertain. The girl's quiet defiance had unsettled her. When the doors opened, passengers began to gather their belongings. Standing in the narrow aisle, the girl stayed in her seat, waiting. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't afraid. She knew her moment was close. The woman who had smiled at her earlier leaned down as she passed. "You're very brave," she whispered softly. The girl nodded, her eyes steady. The passengers filed out slowly, some stealing quick glances at the girl. They remembered her face, her silence, her strength. None of them would forget what they had seen. At the front, the flight attendant forced a polite smile as each passenger exited. But her eyes kept flicking toward the girl, restless and uneasy. For all her authority, she felt a shadow of fear building in her chest. She didn't know why, but she sensed she had not won. The young girl rose at last, her backpack on her shoulders, her notebook pressed to her chest. She walked steadily down the aisle, her steps calm and measured. The cabin was nearly empty now, but the silence was heavy. She passed the attendant without a word, but their eyes met for a brief second. In that gaze, the girl's quiet strength was undeniable. The attendant looked away first. What the attendant didn't know was that the girl's story was about to begin beyond the plane, and the revenge that would shake her world was already in motion. The airport terminal was crowded with people rushing in every direction, rolling luggage clattering against the floor, announcements echoing over the speakers. The young girl stepped off the plane with her backpack snug against her shoulders and her notebook clutched tightly in her hand. The humiliation of the flight was still fresh, but so was the fire inside her chest. The flight attendant walked a few steps behind, her face fixed with an artificial smile as she guided other passengers through the gate. To anyone else, she looked like a professional doing her job. But the girl could see the truth, the flicker of nervousness behind her eyes. The woman knew she had gone too far, and she feared being exposed. The girl walked slowly, scanning the sea of people ahead. She spotted her parents waiting by the arrivals area. Their faces lit up when they saw her, but as they drew closer, their smiles faded. They noticed the stiffness in her steps, the quietness in her face. Her mother bent down to hug her, whispering softly, "What happened?" The girl's arms wrapped around her mother tightly, and for the first time since the incident, she let her voice tremble. "She shouted at me," the girl whispered. "She said I didn't belong." Her father's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he looked past her toward the gate. He saw the flight attendant chatting casually with another crew member, as if nothing had happened. He knelt beside his daughter and touched her cheek gently. "Tell me everything." The girl opened her notebook and showed them the pages. Her small handwriting filled each line with the story of what had happened, the yelling, the humiliation, the silence of the passengers, the way she had been dragged to the front of the plane. Her parents read quietly, their expressions shifting from shock to anger and finally to determination. "You wrote all this?" her mother asked softly. The girl nodded. "I didn't want to forget. I wanted it to be real." Her father's eyes glistened with pride. "You were brave," he said. "So much braver than anyone on that plane." The girl straightened, her chin lifting slightly. She had been alone before, but now she wasn't. Her parents believed her, and with them at her side, she felt stronger than ever. As they moved toward baggage claim, the attendant walked past them quickly, her smile still plastered on her face. But when her eyes met the parents', she saw the fury there. She turned her head away, pretending not to notice. The girl's father stepped closer, his voice firm but controlled. "We'll be speaking to your airline," he said clearly enough for her to hear. The attendant froze for a moment, her mask cracking, before hurrying ahead into the crowd. The girl's mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You don't need to be afraid anymore," she said. But the girl shook her head. "I'm not afraid," she replied quietly. "I just want her to know she was wrong." Later, as they sat in the car driving home, the girl opened her notebook again. This time, her parents leaned closer as she read aloud what she had written. Her words were simple but powerful, describing how it felt to be treated unfairly, how silence from others hurt just as much as cruelty, and how even a child could stand up against injustice. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "People need to hear this," she whispered. "Not just us. Everyone." Her father nodded firmly. "We'll make sure they do." The girl looked out the window, watching the lights of the city pass by. For the first time since stepping on the plane, she felt a deep calm settle in her chest. Her revenge would not come through anger or shouting. It would come through truth. Her story would be her weapon, and it was sharper than anything the flight attendant could imagine. That night, after they reached home, her father scanned the notebook pages into his computer, while her mother typed them into a document. They polished nothing, changed nothing. The words remained exactly as the girl had written them, raw and honest. Then, with her permission, they shared it online. Within hours, the story began to spread. First among friends and family, then among strangers who read it and felt the sting of injustice. People shared it across social media, each post carrying the same message. This is what happened to a young girl on her flight. By morning, thousands had read it. By the end of the day, tens of thousands more. The girl's quiet words, written in her small notebook, had reached farther than she ever dreamed. And somewhere in a hotel room, the flight attendant scrolled through her phone, her face pale as she saw her own actions described for the world to see. She had thought she had silenced the girl. Instead, the girl had found a voice louder than anything she could control. The girl sat at her kitchen table, her parents on either side of her, watching the story spread across the screen. She didn't smile, but her eyes glowed with steady light. Revenge had already begun, and it was stronger than she had imagined. The morning sun streamed through the curtains as the young girl sat at the kitchen table with her notebook beside her. Her parents scrolled through their phones, their faces filled with disbelief. Overnight, the story had spread far beyond their small circle. What had started as a simple post online was now being shared thousands of times every hour. People from across the country were reading the girl's words, reacting with anger, sympathy, and admiration. Her mother read aloud some of the comments. "This is heartbreaking. No child should be treated this way." Another said, "The bravery of this girl is incredible. The flight attendant must answer for this." The girl listened quietly, her small hands folded on the table. She didn't need to smile. She felt something far stronger than joy. She felt her voice being heard. By midday, news reporters began reaching out. Some wanted to interview her parents. Others wanted permission to share the notebook pages directly. The girl's father hesitated, not wanting her to feel overwhelmed, but she nodded with calm determination. "Let them share it," she said softly. "It's not just about me. It's about what's right." The story appeared on news websites within hours. Headlines blared, "Young girl shamed by flight attendant writes, brave account, and child story sparks outrage against airline." Television anchors discussed it on morning shows, their voices heavy with disapproval. At the airline headquarters, executives gathered in a tense meeting. The name of the flight attendant had already been exposed by online readers who recognized her. Complaints were flooding customer service lines, and the company's reputation was spiraling downward. The flight attendant herself sat alone in her hotel room, staring at her phone in disbelief. Every scroll revealed another angry comment, another headline, another stranger condemning her. She thought back to the moment on the plane when she had shouted at the girl, so confident in her power. That confidence had vanished, replaced by fear. The young girl, however, remained steady. She still went about her day as she normally would, reading her books, playing quietly in her room, but every so often she checked her notebook, flipping through the pages as if reminding herself of the power in her words. She didn't gloat, didn't boast. She simply knew the truth had done its work. By evening, something unexpected happened. Several passengers from the flight came forward. They admitted they had been silent, that they had watched but done nothing. Some wrote public apologies, saying they regretted not speaking up when they should have. One man admitted, "I was afraid of causing trouble, but now I realize my silence was part of the cruelty. That girl showed more courage than all of us." The girl read those words and felt a shift inside her. She hadn't only exposed the flight attendant, she had awakened the passengers too. They carried their own guilt, and now they were forced to confront it. The airline finally released a statement late that night. It spoke of regret, serious review, and commitment to better training. The words sounded formal, almost empty, but the girl didn't care. What mattered was that they were forced to respond at all. They could not hide what had been done. Her parents sat with her, explaining gently how the story had gone further than they expected. They asked if she felt scared, but she shook her head. "I'm not scared anymore," she said quietly. "She tried to make me small, but now everyone can see me." The next day, a reporter came to their home for a live interview. The cameras felt strange, the lights bright, but the girl sat calmly on the couch with her notebook in her lap. When the reporter asked her why she wrote down everything that happened, she answered simply, "Because no one was listening on the plane. I wanted someone to listen." Millions of viewers watched that moment on their screens. Many were moved to tears by her honesty. She wasn't angry or hateful, she was calm, clear, and strong. People saw not just a child, but a symbol of courage against unfairness. Meanwhile, the flight attendant's name became a topic of debate everywhere. Some defended her, saying she must have been stressed. But most agreed her actions were cruel and unforgivable. The airline quietly suspended her, but the damage to her reputation was already done. The girl sat at home that night, her parents beside her, watching the coverage play out. She didn't gloat, she didn't laugh. Instead, she opened her notebook again and wrote a single new sentence at the bottom of the last page. "They heard me." For her, that was enough. Her revenge was not about shouting or hurting back. It was about turning silence into a voice so strong it could not be ignored. And now that voice was echoing across the nation. The passengers, the airline, and even the attendant herself were stunned. They had underestimated the strength of the young girl. But the world now knew her story, and there was no turning back. Days that followed felt unreal to the young girl and her family. What had started as a simple story written in a child's notebook was now on every major news outlet. Reporters stood outside their home, neighbors spoke in hushed tones, and strangers sent letters filled with encouragement and thanks. The girl's quiet courage had captured the attention of the world. Her parents tried to shield her from the noise, but she noticed everything. She saw the faces of reporters waiting near the sidewalk, the flashing cameras, and the headlines her father accidentally left open on his laptop. Yet she remained calm. She had never wanted fame. She only wanted her truth to be heard. In classrooms across the country, teachers read aloud her words to their students. In offices, adults shared her story during coffee breaks. Mothers whispered it to their children at bedtime, reminding them to always stand up for themselves. The girl had become more than a passenger on a plane, she had become a symbol. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to contain the damage. They offered public apologies, suspended the flight attendant, and announced new respect and dignity training programs, but their efforts felt hollow. People were not satisfied with polished statements. They wanted accountability. They wanted change. The flight attendant herself was hiding. Her name had spread across the internet, and with it came a flood of anger. She scrolled through the comments, each one a dagger. People described her cruelty, her arrogance, and her downfall. She tried to convince herself it was unfair, that the story had been exaggerated. But deep down, she remembered the look in the girl's eyes, the steady defiance she had ignored. That look haunted her more than the headlines ever could. One evening, the girl's family received an invitation. A large community center in the city wanted her to speak at a gathering. At first, her parents hesitated. She was still so young. But when they asked her how she felt, the girl only said, "If people want to listen, I'll tell them." The night of the event, the hall was filled with hundreds of people. Journalists, families, and children all waited quietly as the young girl stepped onto the stage with her notebook in hand. Her feet barely touched the edge of the podium, but when she opened the pages, the room fell into complete silence. Her voice was soft but clear. She read the same words she had written on the plane, the shouts, the humiliation, the silence of the passengers, and the vow she made to herself not to be broken. The audience hung on every word. Some cried quietly. Others clenched their fists in anger at the injustice she had faced. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked up. For a moment, the room was silent. Then applause erupted loud. Long, unstoppable. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, some even chanting her name. The girl didn't smile widely or wave dramatically. She simply nodded once, her eyes calm, her notebook pressed against her chest. She had been hurt again, and that was enough. In the days that followed, her story spread even further. Activists began using her words to highlight broader issues of unfair treatment in public spaces. People of all ages found strength in her bravery. Letters poured in from strangers around the world. Teachers, flight attendants ashamed of their colleagues, children who had faced bullying, even elderly passengers who admitted they once stayed silent when they should have spoken up. Each letter carried the same message. Her courage had given them courage. The girl read some of the letters aloud at night, her parents listening with pride. She didn't fully understand the scale of her influence, but she understood this. She was no longer alone. Her voice had sparked something much bigger than herself. Far away, the flight attendant saw her face on television again. This time, she couldn't look away. She saw the child standing before hundreds of people, steady and unshaken. The attendant felt a weight in her chest she had never known before. It was more than regret. It was the realization that she had been defeated not by anger, but by honesty. The girl had no need to shout, no need to humiliate in return. Her revenge was clean, powerful, and undeniable. She had exposed the truth, and the truth had silenced the cruel. That night, as the girl prepared for bed, she opened her notebook once more. She added a new line at the bottom of a page. When you write the truth, it speaks louder than shouting. Her parents kissed her forehead, whispering how proud they were. And as she closed her eyes, the notebook rested on her bedside table, glowing under the soft light like a shield forged from words. The world outside was still buzzing with her story, but inside her small room, she felt peace. She had taken the pain from the plane and turned it into strength that could not be taken away. The airline could no longer ignore the storm. What had started as a single story had now become a nationwide discussion. Families talked about it at dinner tables. Passengers whispered about it at airports, and news anchors dissected it on television every night. The young girl's name was not always mentioned, but her words were everywhere, echoing across screens and papers. At the company's headquarters, executives sat in tense silence around a long table. Charts of falling ticket sales and angry emails were projected on the wall. One manager spoke firmly. "We cannot treat this like a small incident. The world is watching us. If we don't act now, we'll lose more than money, we'll lose trust." The decision was made. The airline announced that the flight attendant was no longer part of their staff. They also promised stricter policies, better training, and stronger systems to protect passengers from unfair treatment. It was a desperate attempt to repair the damage, but for many, the apology came too late. The story had already burned itself into the public's mind. The flight attendant sat alone in her apartment when the news appeared on her phone. Her hands shook as she read the company's statement. She had lost her job. She had lost her respect. And worst of all, she had lost her control. Her authority, once so strong in the narrow aisle of a plane, meant nothing now. The look in the young girl's eyes haunted her. She realized that in a single moment of cruelty, she had destroyed her own future. Meanwhile, the young girl went about her life with quiet steadiness. She still went to school, still played with her friends, still read her books at night. But everywhere she went, people recognized her. Strangers stopped to thank her. Teachers asked her to read aloud from her notebook in class. Some called her a hero, but she shook her head gently when she heard that word. "I only told the truth," she said softly. Her parents were proud, though they kept reminding her that she was still a child first. They encouraged her to draw, to play, to laugh, even as reporters asked for more interviews. But they also understood something important. Their daughter had become a voice for many who had been silent too long. One afternoon, the family was invited to a special gathering at a large auditorium. Community leaders, passengers' rights advocates, and even airline staff were present. The hall was filled with people who had followed her story closely. When the girl stepped on stage with her notebook in hand, the room went silent again. This time, she didn't just read about what happened to her. She spoke about the importance of standing up for others, even when it feels difficult. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight far beyond her years. "When you see someone being treated unfairly," she said, "you shouldn't look away, you should speak, because silence hurts too." The audience erupted into applause. Some wiped away tears. Others stood, clapping until their hands ached. The girl stood still, her notebook pressed against her chest, her expression calm. She wasn't seeking praise. She was sharing what she knew to be true. That night, videos of her speech spread online. Millions watched, sharing it with captions like, "This child taught us all a lesson today, and courage doesn't have an age." Even those who had never flown before felt connected to her words. She had become a symbol of honesty, strength, and quiet revenge against cruelty. At the same time, the former flight attendant tried to move on with her life, but the shadow of her actions followed everywhere. Applications for new jobs were denied. Once her name was searched, neighbors looked at her differently. Strangers whispered when they recognized her face. She had built her career on authority, but authority without kindness had crumbled beneath her feet. The girl didn't think about her often anymore. She didn't need to. Her revenge had already been delivered, not through shouting or anger, but through truth and dignity. The attendant was living with the consequences of her own cruelty, while the girl was living with strength. In quiet moments at home, the girl would open her notebook again and add new thoughts. She no longer wrote only about pain. She wrote about hope, about kindness, about courage. The same pages that once carried her shame were now filled with light. Her parents sometimes looked at her in awe, wondering how such strength could fit inside someone so small. But they knew this was who she had always been. The world had only just discovered it. And as the days passed, it became clear that the story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever been shamed. Her revenge had grown into something far greater. It had become a lesson for the world. The days slowly turned into weeks, and life began to settle again for the young girl and her family. The noise of the media softened, the crowds outside their home disappeared, and the story that had once been everywhere started to fade from the headlines, yet its impact remained. People still remembered. Teachers still spoke of it in classrooms. Families still shared it around their tables. The girl herself never chased attention. She was happy to return to school, to sit at her desk with her friends, to laugh during recess. But even in those simple moments, she carried herself differently now. She walked with quiet confidence. She spoke with calm strength. She no longer lowered her eyes when someone looked at her. She had learned something powerful, that even a small voice could shake the world. One afternoon, her teacher asked her to bring her notebook to class. The children gathered around as she read a few lines aloud. Her words were simple, describing how unfairness felt and how courage was not about being big or strong, but about refusing to stay silent. Her classmates listened closely, some nodding, some frowning in thought. When she finished, one boy raised his hand and said, "If it ever happens to you again, I'll speak up." Others agreed, their voices firm. The girl smiled softly. That was the change she hoped for, not just for herself, but for everyone. If her story gave others the courage to act, then her revenge was complete. Meanwhile, the airline continued to face pressure. They had promised reforms, and now they were forced to follow through. New training programs were launched, focusing on respect, patience, and kindness. Posters in staff rooms reminded employees, every passenger deserves dignity. The company hoped to rebuild trust, but the memory of the incident remained a warning. As for the former flight attendant, her life had changed completely. Without her job, without her reputation, she was left to face the consequences of her choices. She often replayed that moment in the plane, the way she had pointed, shouted, and dragged the girl. She realized now how small and cruel it had been. The silence of the passengers had once made her feel powerful, but the words of a child had undone her completely. She tried to write an apology, sending it to the airline and to the girl's family. But the family never responded. The girl did not need her words anymore. The apology could not erase what had been done, nor could it undo the shame the attendant had brought upon herself. At home, the girl's parents framed one page of her notebook and hung it in the living room. It was the page where she had written, "I will show them, I will not be small." Every time they walked past it, they were reminded of her strength. One evening, as the sun set in orange and gold across the sky, the girl sat with her mother and father on the porch. She opened her notebook again, writing slowly, carefully. When her father asked her what she was writing, she looked up with a gentle smile. "It's about tomorrow," she said. "Because I want tomorrow to be better than yesterday." Her mother kissed her forehead, her eyes filled with pride. Her father wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. In that moment, the pain of the past felt distant. What remained was hope, courage, and the certainty that their daughter had turned something cruel into something powerful. The girl didn't think of it as revenge anymore. To her, it was something greater. She had transformed shame into strength, silence into a voice, and cruelty into change. She had shown the world that even the smallest person could leave the deepest mark. As night settled and the stars appeared one by one in the sky, the girl closed her notebook and set it on her lap. She no longer needed to prove herself. She had already done it. Her story had reached hearts she would never meet, changed lives she would never see. That was enough. The world would forget headlines, but it would not forget the lesson that kindness matters, that silence has weight, and that truth, even from a child, can be stronger than authority. And so the girl leaned back in her chair, her eyes reflecting the starlight, her heart steady and free. She was no longer the child who had been shamed on a plane. She was the child who had stood up, who had spoken, who had been heard. And in that, her journey was complete.